Why does a buck that ignores your corn pile every night for 2 weeks suddenly cross 250 yards of open field the first morning a persimmon tree drops ripe fruit? It's not because he's hungry. He's had corn available the entire time. It's because corn and persimmon trigger two completely different responses in a deer's body, and the one that wins isn't even close. I watched this happen on a Browning trail camera while sitting in my Kuyu base layers 2 Octobers ago on a lease in Hickman County, Tennessee. That's the rolling cedar and hardwood country west of Nashville, where the Duck River cuts through limestone bluffs and the bottomland timber holds some of the densest persimmon stands in the state. I had a corn pile 40 yards from my XOP stand that was getting hit regularly, almost entirely after dark, by does and young bucks. 200 yards east of that pile, at the edge of a creek bottom, a wild persimmon tree started dropping ripe fruit around the second week of October. Within 48 hours, the corn pile went cold. The camera showed 0 visits for 3 consecutive nights. The camera I moved to the persimmon tree showed 11 different deer in the first 24 hours, including 2 bucks I'd never photographed on the property before. One of them showed up at 4:30 in the afternoon, a full hour before dark. That buck had never visited the corn in daylight. He crossed open ground in daylight for a persimmon. That's not attraction. That's craving. I checked the corn camera out of curiosity, and the pile was still full. Untouched. The deer hadn't stopped eating. They'd stopped eating corn. Everything on the property had shifted to the persimmon tree like someone flipped a switch, and it stayed that way for the next 2.5 weeks until the last fruit was gone. Then the deer went back to the corn like nothing had happened. And understanding the difference between attraction and craving is what this video is about. I'm going to break down the biology of why persimmon outperforms corn at a level most hunters don't realize, then walk you through exactly how to turn that advantage into a liquid attractant you can make at home for about $3 that lasts an entire season. And near the end, there's an application trick that turns persimmon juice from a food attractant into a scent trail that works even in states where baiting is illegal because the deer never consume anything. Before we get into the recipe, let's talk about why persimmon does what it does. Because once you understand the biology, you'll never look at your corn pile the same way. Corn is roughly 72% carbohydrate by weight, but almost all of that carbohydrate is starch. Starch is a complex molecule that has to be broken down through fermentation in the deer's rumen before the body can convert it to usable glucose. That fermentation process takes hours. The energy payoff from corn is real, but it's slow. A deer eating corn is making a long-term investment. A ripe persimmon is roughly 34% sugar by weight, and that sugar is almost entirely fructose and glucose, simple sugars that absorb through the gut, wall into the bloodstream almost immediately. No rumen fermentation needed, no hours of waiting. The energy hits fast, the way a candy bar hits you at 2 p.m. versus a bowl of rice at lunch. For a deer in the pre-winter caloric loading phase, that instant energy signal is orders of magnitude more compelling than starch. The deer's body is screaming for fast fuel, and persimmon delivers it in a form that nothing else in the woods matches. White oak acorns are roughly 6% fat and moderate carbohydrate, which makes them an excellent food source, but their sugar content is low. Corn is high energy, but slow release. Persimmon is the only naturally occurring food source in most of the whitetail's range that delivers high concentration, simple sugars in a form the body can use immediately. That's why deer will walk past acorns and ignore corn to get to a ripe persimmon. The corn is a habit. The persimmon is a craving. You can't compete with a craving by offering more of a habit. I think this is why the commercial persimmon-flavored corn products get mixed reviews on the forums. An Arkansas hunting poster put out a 50-pound bag of persimmon-flavored corn, and it barely got touched. The deer could smell the persimmon flavoring, but when they tasted it, it was still corn. The flavor promise didn't match the nutritional payoff. Real persimmon delivers on both. The scent says sugar, the taste confirms it. The calories hit immediately. There's no mismatch for the deer to figure out and walk away from. Real persimmon juice on a branch doesn't have that problem because it is persimmon. The scent is authentic. The chemical profile matches what the deer expects to find when it arrives. The scent is the other half of the equation, and this is the part that makes persimmon juice work as a long-range attractant. A ripe persimmon releases volatile ester compounds as the fruit sugars ferment on the surface. Those esters, primarily ethyl acetate and ethyl butyrate, are highly aromatic and travel on thermal currents the way doe estrus travels on wind. On a calm morning with moderate humidity, the scent plume from a single ripe persimmon on the ground can reach 100 to 150 yards. A persimmon tree with a dozen fruits on the ground pushes that scent plume out to 200 to 300 yards, roughly 2 to 3 football fields, depending on terrain and air movement. Compare that to corn, which produces almost no volatile scent from the kernel itself. A corn pile is a visual and ground-level attractant. A deer has to walk within about 20 yards of corn to smell it. A ripe persimmon advertises its presence from 10 times that distance through airborne chemistry. That difference in scent range is why persimmon pulls deer that corn never reaches. An archery talk poster from Arkansas described watching a buck lope 250 yards across a soybean field to eat 1 or 2 dropped persimmons, then lope right back. The scent pulled him out of cover, across open ground, in a way that corn sitting 40 yards from his bed never did. That poster wasn't exaggerating. I've seen the same behavior on my own cameras. A doe that hadn't left the tree line in 3 weeks of camera data walked 180 yards into open pasture to reach a persimmon tree that had started dropping fruit overnight. She was there at 3 p.m. broad daylight. That kind of movement doesn't happen for corn. Think about that for a second. A deer will cross open ground in daylight for a fruit that delivers immediate sugar. It won't do that for corn, which delivers the same calories on a 6-hour delay. The urgency is different, and the deer's behavior reflects the urgency. The commercial attractant companies know this. Wild Game Innovations sells a persimmon-based powder called Persimmon Crushed that claims to release 600% more scent molecules than ordinary feed grains. Big and J sells Persimmon B2 as what they call a long-range attractant. Both products cost $12 to $20 per bag. The active ingredient that makes them work is the same fructose fermentation chemistry you can replicate at home for pennies. A 5-pound bag of Persimmon Crushed costs about $15 at Walmart. One homemade batch of persimmon juice costs about $3 and lasts longer because liquid on a wick releases scent more consistently than powder on the ground. Over a 5-year hunting career, the difference is roughly $300 in commercial product versus $15 in vodka and free fruit. The deer at my place didn't prefer the commercial version. They responded to both equally, which tells me the active chemistry is the same regardless of the packaging. My wallet has opinions about which one I'm using this season. That chemistry is what I organized into the Buck Hunter's Bible, along with 76 other tricks that work on the same principle. Understanding why something attracts deer instead of just dumping it on the ground and hoping. 90 pages, every trick with the biology behind it, scent control, stand placement, all 3 rut phases, and a chapter of old-timer methods that were standard practice before attractants came in camo printed bags. There's a pre-hunt reference card at the back you can print and take to the stand. Links in the description below this video, or if you're watching on a TV, pull out your phone and scan the QR code on screen. All right, the recipe. The simplest version uses real persimmons. If you have access to a persimmon tree, and in most of the Southeast, Midwest, and Mid-Atlantic you do, collect ripe fruit after the first frost. Frost is important because it breaks down the tannins that make unripe persimmons astringent enough to turn your mouth inside out. If you've ever bitten into a green persimmon, you know exactly what I mean. It feels like your tongue is wearing a sweater. The tannin content in unripe persimmon is so high that it causes an immediate astringent reaction that puckers every soft tissue in your mouth. Deer won't touch unripe persimmon for the same reason. The tannins signal inedible. After frost, the tannins break down into simple sugars through a process called hydrolysis, and the fruit transforms from inedible to irresistible in a matter of days. The first hard frost is the starting gun for persimmon season, and every deer in the area knows it. Ripe persimmons are soft, wrinkled, and deep orange to brown. They should squish between your fingers. One thing most hunters don't know about persimmon trees: they're either male or female, and only the females produce fruit. You can walk past a dozen persimmon trees in the timber and never see fruit because you're looking at males. The females are the ones with fruit hanging from the branches starting in late summer. When you're scouting in August and September, Mark every female persimmon on your property with a GPS pin. Those pins become your October and November hotspots. I found 6 female persimmons on my Hickman County lease in August of last year, and 3 of them were within 60 yards of existing stand positions. The other 3 I hung new sets on specifically for persimmon season. GrowingDeer.tv recommends this specifically as a scouting tactic, and I've found it works better than any camera survey for predicting where deer will concentrate in early season. Collect a half cup of ripe fruit, dice it, and drop it into a mason jar with 2 cups of cheap vodka, the bottom shelf stuff works fine, and an 1/8 cup of water. Seal the jar, shake it, and store it in a dark cabinet for 2 to 3 months. Shake it once every few days. The vodka extracts the fructose, the ester compounds, and the aromatic volatiles from the fruit and preserves them in a shelf-stable liquid that won't mold or spoil. After 2 to 3 months, strain out the fruit pulp through cheesecloth and pour the liquid into a spray bottle. That's your persimmon juice. 1 batch makes enough to last a full season of 20 to 25 applications. Store it at room temperature in a dark cabinet. The alcohol preserves it indefinitely. I have a batch from 2 seasons ago that still smells as strong as the day I strained it. Total cost, about $3 for the vodka and free persimmons if you know where a tree is. My wife found the jar in the cabinet in December and asked why there was fruit soaking in alcohol next to the coffee mugs. I told her it was a science project. She's heard that one before. If you don't have access to a persimmon tree, there's a shortcut that works almost as well. Buy a bottle of pure persimmon extract or persimmon flavoring from a baking supply store or online. Mix 1 ounce of extract with 8 ounces of water and a 1/4 ounce of vegetable glycerin, which acts as a carrier that slows evaporation, the same way canola oil works in the vanilla mixture I covered in a previous video. Shake it up, put it in a spray bottle, and you've got a persimmon scent attractant that costs under $2 per bottle and lasts 6 to 8 hours per application. The glycerin version doesn't have the full fructose profile of the vodka extraction, but the aromatic esters are present, and that's what pulls deer from distance. The fructose matters for consumption. The esters matter for the scent plume. If you're using this as a scent attractant in a no-bait state, the ester profile is all you need. Application is where most guys who try persimmon juice get it wrong, and I made the same mistake my first season. I sprayed it on a stump 20 yards from my stand and sat over it like a corn pile. Got raccoons, lots of raccoons, and one opossum that licked the stump for 45 minutes while I watched through my Weatherby scope, wondering where my life choices had gone wrong. The problem was concentration and placement. A puddle of persimmon juice on a stump is a food source, and every nocturnal scavenger within 100 yards finds it before the deer do. The application that works is dispersed, not concentrated. Spray the persimmon juice on leaves and branches at chest height along 50 to 75 yards of trail leading toward your stand. 3 to 4 sprays per branch, 1 branch every 10 to 15 yards. You're creating an airborne scent corridor, not a food station. The volatile esters rise off the sprayed surfaces on morning thermals and create a scent plume that a deer crossing the trail 100 yards downwind can detect. The deer follows the scent corridor toward the source, which leads it past your stand. I set up the corridor so it runs perpendicular to the prevailing morning wind on one side and the prevailing evening wind on the other. That way, no matter which sit I'm hunting, the scent is blowing off the sprayed branches into open timber where deer are traveling. The corridor doesn't have to be a straight line. Follow the natural trail and spray branches along it. The deer is already using that trail. The persimmon scent gives him a reason to use it at 4:30 instead of 6:30. That 90-minute shift from after dark to before dark is the entire difference between a trail camera photo and a filled tag. A poster on the Ohio Outdoors Forum described the same thing. Once the local persimmons started dropping, the bucks that had been strictly nocturnal on camera started showing up an hour before last light. The caloric urgency of the persimmon was strong enough to override the caution that had kept them moving after dark all season. It's the same principle as a drag trail, but airborne instead of ground level, and it works on scent rather than food. In states where baiting is banned, this application is legal because the deer never consumes anything. You're using a scent attractant the same way you'd use Mrs. Doe P's estrus or vanilla extract. The persimmon juice is on branches above the deer's reach, not on the ground where it can be eaten. That said, always check your state regulations. A few states define bait broadly enough that any food-derived substance placed to attract deer could technically qualify. 2 minutes on your state wildlife agency's website clears it up. Timing matters more with persimmon than with most attractants, and this is where the biology gives you an advantage that no other product matches. The window opens when local persimmon trees start dropping ripe fruit, typically late September through October in most of the whitetail range, and closes when the fruit is gone, usually by late November. That 6 to 8 week window overlaps perfectly with pre-rut and rut in most of the whitetail range, which means you're deploying the strongest natural food attractant available at the exact time bucks are moving the most during daylight. That timing overlap isn't a coincidence. Persimmon evolved to drop its fruit when large mammals were most active and most likely to eat it and spread the seeds. The deer in the tree have been running this arrangement for thousands of years. You're just inserting yourself into a relationship that was already working. During that window, every deer in the area is already keyed into persimmon scent because the real trees are producing it. Your persimmon juice doesn't introduce a foreign smell. It amplifies a signal the deer are already searching for. That's the same authentication principle I talked about in the vanilla video. The scent matches an existing entry in the deer's scent memory. It triggers investigation, not alarm, because the deer has been smelling real persimmon for weeks. Outside that window, persimmon juice still works as a curiosity scent, similar to vanilla, but the response is weaker because the deer isn't in persimmon seeking mode. A buddy who guides in Colbert County, Alabama, that's the Tennessee River bottom country along the state line, where the hardwood flats hold persimmon trees every 100 yards, and the deer have been eating them since before the first European settlers arrived, told me he starts putting out persimmon scent wicks the first week of October, regardless of whether the local trees have dropped yet. He says it primes the deer to start looking before the natural supply hits the ground, and when the real fruit drops, the deer are already checking his wicks on a daily pattern. I tried this last fall and the camera data supported it, though I'll admit the sample was small, 2 cameras over 3 weeks on one property. The treated wicks got roughly twice the investigation rate of untreated control branches in the same area. Not proof of anything on that scale, but consistent enough to keep running the experiment this season. One limitation that's important, and I need to be upfront about. If you hunt north of roughly the USDA Hardiness Zone 7 line, which runs through southern Virginia, Kentucky, Missouri, and Kansas, native persimmon trees become scarce and disappear entirely by Zone 5. In northern Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and the Dakotas, there are no wild persimmons. Deer in those areas have never smelled persimmon in their lives. The scent doesn't match anything in their experience database, which means it functions as a pure curiosity scent rather than a food recognition trigger. It still works the way vanilla works, by triggering investigation of an unfamiliar but non-threatening smell. But the response is weaker and less predictable than in persimmon country where the deer already know what they're smelling. If you hunt north of the persimmon line, this technique is worth trying, but don't expect the same aggressive response you'd get in Tennessee or Alabama. In those conditions, you're better off with the acorn-based or apple-based attractants that match the local food profile. Apple works in the Northeast and Great Lakes because apple trees are native, and deer in those regions have been eating wild apples for generations. The scent matches their memory the same way persimmon matches memory in the South and Midwest. A hunter on the Gun and Game forum put it simply, persimmons are the best attractant he's ever used, but only where they grow naturally. I agree with that completely. The raccoon problem deserves its own mention because it's the #1 complaint I see from hunters who try persimmon-based attractants. Raccoons have a stronger sweet tooth response than deer, and they're nocturnal, which means they find your persimmon setup before the deer do almost every time. The dispersed spray method I described largely solves this because there's nothing pooled on the ground for raccoons to camp on. But if you're using persimmon juice on a cotton wick or a stump where liquid accumulates, expect raccoon activity. The workaround is the same one I use for molasses. Apply in the early afternoon so the scent plume is active during the last 2 hours of daylight when deer are moving, but raccoons are still denned. By the time raccoons become active after dark, the initial concentration has diminished. You're giving the deer a head start. I refresh my spray trail every 3 to 4 days during the peak window. The alcohol evaporates within the first hour, leaving the fructose and ester residue on the branch surface. That residue continues releasing scent for 48 to 72 hours, depending on humidity. Rain washes it off, so reapply after any significant rainfall. The other workaround is height. Spray persimmon juice on branches at 5 to 6 feet off the ground, roughly forehead height on a standing adult. The scent rises on thermals. Raccoons can smell it, but can't reach the source to lick it clean. I tested this in Crawford County, Indiana. That's the forested hill country along the Ohio River in the southern part of the state, where the terrain is steep enough that thermals are predictable and the hardwood canopy holds persimmon, pawpaw, and wild grape, and the higher placement kept the wick active for 3 full days instead of 1 night. Everything in this video, plus about 60 more field-tested techniques, are organized in the Buck Hunter's Bible. It's the field reference I keep going back to because every trick has the reasoning behind it. Scent control, attractant chemistry, stand placement by terrain, rut phase tactics, and a full chapter of old-timer methods that go back decades. There's a 1-page reference card at the back that fits in your pack. 2 years of testing went into it, and it's in the description below. Point your phone at the QR code on screen if you're watching on a TV. The guys who hunt persimmon country and know about this don't talk about it at the pro shop. Not because it's a secret, because telling someone you hunt with a jar of fruit soaked in bottom shelf vodka doesn't sound like serious hunting. It sounds like a joke. But the deer don't care what it sounds like. They care what it smells like. And what it smells like is the highest sugar, fastest absorbing, most craved natural food source in their entire range, concentrated into a liquid you can spray on a branch and carry in your pocket. 1 jar, 1 season, $3. And somewhere between 100 and 300 yards, a buck that has been ignoring your corn pile for 2 weeks picks up his head, turns into the wind, and starts walking. What happens next is up to you.